Hello and welcome. Today we're speaking to the CEO of Signcraft in Australia, Kim Nauntofte. Now, Kim outlines the details of signage, both internal and external, and a lot of the key machinations around what's involved in signage.
Let's jump into it.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. Please visit precar.com.au.
Hi Kim, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for joining us today. Can you maybe just tell us about yourself and your experience in the signage industry?
Yes, my name is Kim Nauntofte and I'm Danish, and I have been in this industry for 25, 28 years. My background is engineering, business and things like that. And after being a CEO on a big Danish company, I went out on my own and bought a sign company in Denmark at that time, a big sign company with production in Europe, 3 factories all over the place. The short version of that is that the company was in trouble a little bit, and my job was to see what could we do with that. So I bought the company and moved the production to Asia. The concept was that we needed to be more competitive, and we wanted to produce what we called at that time European quality at Asian prices, and that was the concept. It's a long story, but I've done that for 25 years and focused on big projects all over the world, like focusing on big clients. Volvo Trucks, a big one, where we had exclusive delivery of external signs for them for 10 years and stuff like that. So that's where I was coming from in this business. And this business is the same all over the world. It's the same characteristics, so I've done it in South America, in Europe, in Asia, and it's the same basic characteristics. So how does that relate to Australia? Obviously, my plan when I moved I had built up a factory in Bangkok and one in Manila, Philippines, because that was at that time, the best places, and still is, in my opinion, to produce these kind of things. So I did that, and my plan was to then export back to Europe, and that didn't really work out the way I had planned it. But what worked out was Australia was a market where there was interest. We were competitive, so I became a relatively big subcontractor to Australian sign companies and other companies in metal and acrylic and these kind of things. When then we are now 2019, 2020, and I had been for some time subcontracting to Signcraft as a pure subcontractor. We knew about each other, but I was also supplying to other sign companies in Australia. But COVID hit, and Signcraft was at that time a little bit in turbulence, I would say. So the owner, Sam King, who started this whole company, I'll talk about Signcraft in a minute. He started in 1971, basically from nothing, and built the whole thing up and became the biggest sign company in Australia with production in all states and all that. So very strong company. And then there was some turbulence in 2018, 19, and COVID hit. And then Sam and I talked, about that. And as you know, when COVID hit, nobody knew what's going to happen. So we talked about it and decided, why don't we make a joint venture, join forces, and part of that would be I relocate here to Melbourne and take over as the CEO of Signcraft, and then starting building this joint venture. We both could see that if we do that in a smart way, that's a competitive edge that we could extract, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay, it's a fascinating story. So you started in Europe, into Asia. Now you're part of a joint venture in Australia. So that's a fair bit of travelling around. Now, you mentioned Signcraft started back in 1971. I'm keen to get an understanding, because a lot of us in the industry have heard or know the name Signcraft, but we probably don't really understand the Signcraft story. So just keen to get your expertise on who is Signcraft and what do you do?
As I said, Sam King, which is basically an Irish man coming out on the boat in the 60s, starting here, doing signage and, building up. He was employed by a signage company and realized this could be done smarter and better and all that. So he, rented a small shed and, built it up in different factories. This is the fourth one. So growth. And then in 20, this is obviously before my time, but 2007, he built this factory here in Altona. So we have 15,000 square meters here as a production facility. And the concept is full-fledged production. That is probably where we, Signcraft, are different from our main competitors. They tend to maybe produce something in-house and then outsource the rest. What we are doing is we have all the functions, the production from metal, acrylic, electrical, graphics, printing, all the elements that is in signage. And then, as I said, we added on then our Asian factory in Manila, Philippines, that has the same capabilities, but obviously we can do that at an efficient prices, simply because labor is more cost efficient in that area of the world. So that's what we're doing. So if the question is, well, what are we actually doing here? What we say is we bring brands to life. That means we put up hardware, signs and stuff on the walls and buildings that actually shows what this is about. So a car dealership, when you pass by it and you see the things, the pylons, the fascia, the logos, all these things that make you as a potential buyer of cars see that, okay, this is Toyota, this is Mazda. That's what we do. So if you take off everything we do, the building is just a flat building. And then when we put it on, that's where it shows what this is. So that is what we do. And also interior signage and all these things. And that is, these kind of products are basically aluminum and steel for the structure, and then acrylic translucent products where light comes through with all kinds of colors, shapes, and all what you see there, logos in 3 dimensions, and that's what we do. It's a little bit of a niche area, I would say, because clients, and you started a little bit talking about that clients tend not to realize that this has to go on their building. So they very focused on building, order the windows, the doors, and the floors, and all that, and then suddenly, oops, we're gonna open in a month's time. What about the signage? And then they come to us and ask for, can you do this quickly? And so that's a little bit of the characteristics of this industry. So we have to be very agile and fast to meet these kind of demands. We can't change the clients. We can try, but the client is very important for us. And our focus is to make sure that we build client loyalty. And so we need to adapt to that and be able to play in that space.
Kim, can you explain the process for doing signage? So I worked on the OEM side from a signage point of view, but what's your process? How do you start right from the very beginning, and how do you go through the whole workflow of creating signage?
Yeah, so let's say here, our business development people are the ones communicating with the client. They understand what the client wants and send drawings back and forth, graphics, and ending up with the quote and the pricing, and the client hopefully says yes, and then that's where we start. Then it moves into what we call project management. That is where all the details are then planned. First of all, production, right? So we make all the drawings ready for production, and then it goes into our production, and that is the components there. It always starts in what we call the metal shop. Metal shop is welding steel and aluminium into structures. So we start from raw steel, raw aluminium sheets and profiles, and then we weld that into the structures. And then at the same time, we look at the decoration, the cladding, where we use either aluminium or ACM, which is a special product very much used in our industry, which has color stability and durability and all that. And then acrylic, because acrylic is a plastic that we can shape and form in all different shapes, and then we can decorate that with vinyl and paint and stuff like that, and then we can put in LED illumination. So that's basically what it is. So it's simple, simple product to some extent, but it needs to look nice, consistent, and meet the purpose, right? Selling the brand, visualizing the brand for the client. And obviously in difference, we have three major segments here. One is automotive that we can talk a little bit deeper about. And we have what we call construction. That is sky signs on big buildings, one-off big 20-meter big signs put up on a building, stuff like that. Then we have retail. That is, in the supermarket space and this kind of thing. So that's our biggest three market segments. And then we have other, which is obviously all the rest. So there's no segments we are not servicing, but with our size and capabilities, we are obviously looking for the bigger clients and that has volumes and programs. So that's why, for example, automotive, we are and have done for many years. Signcraft has done for many years being exclusive, delivery of signage to the big car companies, automotive, Toyota, Mazda, Suzuki, Honda, these kind of companies. And so we are strong in that space. I would say we are the strongest in the automotive segment. And characteristics for these kind of projects is that, when they roll out what we call a CI, a corporate identity, the client needs to have that fully consistent in all dealerships. Obviously, they want the same look, whether you are in Adelaide or Brisbane or wherever you are in the rural areas. So Toyota wants their dealership to look a specific way, and our job is to make sure that happens. We're not designing their brand. They are telling us this is what we want to have on the walls, and we produce that.
And Kim, do you have certain regulations that you need to adhere to?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the challenge we have right now, not so much in the automotive, but it's coming there also. That is what we call combustibility, right? That products that are going on buildings. You remember the horrible fire in London way back, where the whole building burned off in very, very short time. Part of that was the material, that the combustibility of the material. And obviously plastic is something that burns. And there are other products with plastic content that easily burn. So what happens now, where we see that all over the world, that when signs are going up on the building, we need a permit. And part of that permit is that in some areas, combustible materials are not allowed. And there are different versions of that. So, if there's a little bit, it's okay. But in some places, nothing that can burn is allowed. And that leaves you back with metal, basically, and aluminium for the decoration. So the problem with aluminium is it's not translucent. Light doesn't pass through, so to speak. So, and any product where light passes through is combustible. That's the nature of it. So that's the challenge. So how do you get something that can actually be seen at night without using combustible materials? And we have different ways of perforating the metal so that light can come out, but it's never going to be what you can create, obviously, with plastic. We call that acrylic, but it's basically plastic.
There are many challenges, I suppose, when I think of the problems that you solve for customers. They're very broad and wide, because if I think of the customers you just mentioned, if we just go down the funnel of automotive, there's the car company, the OEM, there's the dealer, who's the other customer, and you've got the brand trying to tell a consistent story. So I think you raise a very good point that buildings will vary across the country, because no two dealerships physically are the same. They're similar. There may be some similar ones, but some can be very different. So it must be a big challenge that you've got to solve for the customer, the OEM, where you bring that standard corporate identity to life on all different types of buildings.
Yes, and all different kind of regulations also, right? Because it's down to the inspector in each state and in each municipality to decide whether he thinks that this is fair or not. And the other thing is, how much light are we allowed to have on the sign? Some areas they say, no, we don't. We have 90 lux and that's it, and all that. So, but the point you make there that obviously, if you look at companies like Toyota, and all of them, they have a brand they want to promote, but the dealers are individual business people, right? So they also look at, okay, what's the cost of this to put that up on my building, and why can't I use my local sign company here around the corner, because he buys cars and trucks from me, so can't I just use him? And what the corporate people understands is that there's no way you can get consistency if you allow every dealer to do his own thing, so to speak. That's not me promoting this. This is just a fact of life. You cannot have 20 different sign companies to produce, even if it's the same CI, it's the same thing. What you're going to see is not consistent. So that's why companies like Toyota, Honda, Mazda, they go to us and say, can you do the whole rollout? Because it's not only getting the signs up, it's also, what about maintenance? How long time does these signs stay with the same quality? And as you surely know, if you leave your car out 5 years without washing it, it doesn't look the same as when you bought it. And exactly the same thing happens to the signage. And that's one of the challenges we have to get that message across, that if we want that to look the same after 5 years and 10 years, we can do that, but we need to do some maintenance on it. That's where we sometimes have a little bit of a challenge, because everything has a cost. And but the bottom line is that the what I will say, the really professional big automotive companies, and the ones I mentioned are definitely among them. They understand that part of the trick is to make sure that there's a good arrangement with the dealer. So, for example, the corporate entity buys the signage, they pay for it, and then the dealer gets an advantage with all the other things he's doing with the car company, to say, dear dealer, if you do this within this day, you get discount on the cars. I'm just making it up. But that kind of structure means that you align motivation, right? That the corporate car company gets what they want, meaning consistent identity, and the dealer is not so much focused on what's the price of this and could I get this cheaper and all that. He's focused on, okay, if this is what corporate wants, then my advantage is that I get benefits out of that. That's one part of what how they do this.
And I'm just thinking from the other problems that you said that you've got with each municipality, because it's very much the local council can either veto the size of a pylon. They can also stop a sign from a certain height from the ground, etc. So there's all these limitations so you've got a team of people that work with the dealer to come up with solutions for that.
So what we do typically is, let's take a standard dealership, right? So we have a corporate identity. We know exactly what they do. So we work with the local branding people and say, okay, this dealership needs a 6-meter pylon, it needs 20 meters of fascia and 2 logos and all that. So we make what we call a mock-up, a graphics that shows this is how your dealership will look like. So we send people there to do survey, we make pictures. So here's the best graphics we can show of this is how your dealership is going to look. And here's the price. And the price is obviously negotiated centrally. So it's just a process back and forth. And when the client then says, yep, this is what I want, then the dealer gets, also, yes, tick. And then we start, right? But the problem with that is that there's always, as I mentioned earlier, a relatively limited time to do this. So we don't necessarily have all the permits and the approvals locally before we actually need to start. And that's where we need to be very careful, because sometimes we get caught out flat-footed by having started, and then suddenly there's a local authority that comes in and say, oh, you can't do this. So that's the challenge, right? To make sure. And we know obviously now where are the tricky areas. We also know, on in what kind of buildings can this be critical. So we try early on to discuss and say, hey, this might be a problem. So let's try to get the permits done before, so we don't get caught out flat-footed, because then that spells out delay, right? That's what the consequence of that is, plus extra cost and all that.
Now, Kim, another question for me from a support perspective. So do you have to keep, I'm thinking from the auto industry, we keep spare parts for cars. Are there spare parts for signs? Because I'm thinking, pylons get crashed into, storms come through, you get flooding, flood events. So when all this stuff happens, is there a support network from an after sales and where you got service technicians that go help fix signs and all that sort of stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, the main components there, you can split them into two. One is the genuine materials like sheets and stuff like that. We have that on stock, but we can't produce, for example, panels on pylons. Right? We need to know which panel was it that was hit, and we can't have all the different panels on stock, but we can produce them fairly quickly because when we have the dimensions. So that's not a challenge. The challenge is that the logos, for example, if you look at Toyota, again, example, the Toyota brand logo, they come in different sizes. They come, and then they take time to produce, because that's a tricky process where you need to vacuum form the acrylic. You need to decorate it with this. If you realize when you look at a Toyota logo, it's like there's a mirror effect and all that, the light effect and these things. And some of them are translucent, so light comes through, and some are not. So that's where we keep these on stock as best we can and say. But normally the logos doesn't really get damaged. It's more or less about as you say, people drive into it, and or there's a storm coming through, or a crane hitting it or something. So it's very much like what we call panels and stuff like that. So we don't hold stock like in the automotive industry. They do that, but we can be pretty fast on delivering, because especially with the clients where we have done for many years, we have records on, if we know this dealership in where we know exactly what that is and what the pylon is, so it's easy to. And that's the beauty of being sole supplier, that we know all the dealerships in the country and can quickly get the specs, and so we don't have to send somebody out there again to measure it. We can ask the dealer, make a picture, let's see what it is, and we have the dimensions and all that here.
And Kim, do you produce everything out of Melbourne? Because Australia is a pretty big country. So do you produce here, then ship it by truck, or how do you get the signage across to dealers?
What we have done, we are now in what I call year 3, right? We started in 2020 with moving forward from the turbulent period, so to speak, right? So there was a little bit of, we needed to, new leadership, new direction. And so that was what we spent time on in the first year, and then we start growing again. But in that period, we only produced here in Melbourne, and we couldn't activate Manila as fast as we wanted because we couldn't travel. We couldn't, it was really complicated, so to speak. But then when things opened up again, we activated Manila, so we produce stuff over there. So typically, what we call semi-finished goods. So we produce panels, raw panels, aluminum panels that are not painted, but they are standard. We produce steel structures that can, be transported here in containers. They are here on our store. So when a new pylon is ordered, we don't have to start welding from scratch. We pick out a structure, and that saves us time. So that is what we do. What we also have done now is, because we have this strategy of having strong footprints in each state. That Signcraft had that back in 2015, 16, up till that time. And then there was some restructuring going on. So and part of that was actually we moved production equipment from the Signcraft factory in Brisbane. We moved that to Manila. So that was why I was saying before we were subcontracting for Signcraft. But we also, with a strong footprint in each state, we need to be close for 2 reasons. We need to be close to the clients. One is to save, 800 kilometers to Sydney, double up to Brisbane. It's an expensive freight cost. So that's why by July 1 this year, we took over a sign company in Sydney, because we want to produce up there. And we needed more capacity also because we grew top line 30% last year. So, we needed more capacity because we continue growing. So we have now a fully fledged production platform here, obviously in Melbourne. We have one in Sydney, and as I said, we have the one in Manila. So that gives us closeness to client, gives us shorter delivery distances.
And Kim, what have been the changes over the last 5 years in terms of signage? Because I was up in Beijing a couple of years ago, and I was quite amazed at how digital all the signage was. It seemed a lot ahead of where countries like Australia are at the moment. What have been the main changes, and where do you see it going to in the future?
I think the way to look at that is to look in the different market segments, right? What you see in China is a lot of digital, but you don't see that in the automotive. I mean, you start seeing that in automotive, but not really, because the digital is where you need to have images changing all the time, and that's much more into the advertising space. What if we look at what has the big change been in our industry and focus on automotive, right? If we do that, then the changes are obviously mostly on the pressure on the cost and the timing, how much time is available for us to do our process. That's where the pressure is. I would say there's not much change in the technology on the outdoor areas, okay? But in the indoor, that's where digital comes in, right? That's where things starts moving fast. So when the potential client is in the dealership, that's where digital comes in. And that is where we are now moving also, because, when we look, I have a 5-year plan on where do we like to take this company in 5 years. That's any responsible company, has that. So if I look at my 2023 to 2028 plan, part of that is that we need an increased revenues coming from other areas than where we are now, right? So we obviously want to grow our business as we do, but we also need to add new revenue streams into that. And the trick is then to say, we can't just start up something completely different. It has to be an organic kind of growth with extending our existing streams, but add on new streams that relates to that. And that's the project that we have. That project is about putting up digital advertising screens in supermarket aisles. That's the short version of that. But it's not just putting up digital screens. It is like an interactive system, so that if you go into a supermarket aisle and you see in the aisle, you see normal advertising going on. And then if you look at a specific product, then the advertising on the screen change to what you're looking at. That's the very simplified. So we have that technology. So let's say I walk in the supermarket and I am identifying as a male, this in this age group and stuff like that. Then the system picks that up, and then we obviously in the background have agreements with the advertisers on what is your target, target group from clients, and then think about this. You have these 6 seconds advertising going on a regular basis, and then when a target person in their target group shows up, the advertising changes. So if I go there, I look at Doritos, the Doritos ad comes up, and then the system identifies, am I looking at it 1 second, 3 seconds, or 6 seconds? If I look at it 1 second, the system knows I'm not interested. If I look 3 seconds, okay, I'm interested, but not really. 6 seconds, I'm interested because I spent 6 seconds to see the whole ad. So that gives feedback on what the ad is about. Do you have Doritos? Do you have an efficient ad? And also, what's the behavior is the client actually taking Doritos, looking at putting it back, or is he putting it in the basket? This kind of things. So there are 3 revenue streams in there. The first one is all the hardware, put it up, maintain it, all that. That's an easy addition to what we do today, because that's hardware, that is welding, it's all this. Then there's the sales of the advertising, right? The 6 seconds sequence, selling that, get a revenue stream from the ad. And then there is and probably the biggest one, that's what are we doing with all the data? How can we present that to the advertisers in an attractive way where they get information they have no other way to get, right? For example, we can say that Coca-Cola, example, they in these shops, you had last week 400 people looking in your target group, looking at your product. X% of them took it up, looked at it, bought it, X% put it back, X% went to Pepsi and took that up. This kind of things. That's what we can do.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because here we are, we take it all for granted. And it gets back to, John, when we spoke with Carl Winther way back 3 years ago when we first started the podcast, and his profound wisdom of paid marketing, owned and earned. Earned being the social media stuff, paid being the normal advertising, but the owned is what everyone takes for granted, which is signage. And then when we think of signage, traditionally we just think of the outside signage. As Kim's saying, the inside signage is as powerful because it's that journey that you take. You've looked at a brand online, you've gone to the dealership because the outside signage has drawn you in because it connects with what you've seen digitally. But then you go inside and then you've got the internal signage, which is different again. So the outside signage could be still very traditional, but the inside signage is already now being dynamic. So this is the evolution that's underway, which is pretty exciting.
Exactly. And then the outside signage is to attract the people. And that doesn't have to change much. That is, here you are, and then you go inside the dealership. And that's where the high level of information needs to be. Right, because back to the dealerships, this technology I just described in a supermarket, right? If you think about it in a car dealership, if there are identification in there that says, all right, here you have 6 different cars in your dealership, and this car here attracts very attention from females 35 to 40 with small kids, right? They looked at it, they went into it, and this car over here, you don't have much traffic on that one. That means dealers can get some information on how do I use my space? What am I putting on my limited floor space? So I'm sure I put things there that attracts my target group, things like that. So we focused on supermarkets right now, but we're talking to when we have our clients here and so we talk about that this technology have many different areas of use. So that's how that could be in automotive.
It's interesting, Kim. Last week we interviewed some CGI launch technology about how you could market a vehicle with CGI, but you could test different colors of cars and work out which one's going to get the best result. It's interesting, if you could do that to draw people into your showroom, you could then know what to have in the showroom, and then you could do the 360 on that to see whether what worked digitally over here did it translate into physical activity in the showroom for that same vehicle.
Yes, and think about it that you could go in there and the system will identify, hey, this is a target client, and then here comes the screen with that vehicle on the wall and a press, what color do you want? I want this and that, and then you can build your dream car if you want while you're in there, because the deeper discussion here is this whole way of selling stuff, COVID taking into consideration that end of the day, you can buy a car from the internet. Here comes your car the next day. And I don't think that's going to happen. Why? Because there still needs to be service facilities. And that is a big part of what the dealerships are doing, obviously. Their revenue stream is very much related to spare parts and service. So the facility needs to be there. And there's nothing that competes with, if you buy a car, a house is what people spend their money on, right? So you don't just do that like that. So you have to, like you wouldn't buy a house by just looking at it on the on the website, and nothing beats the fact, especially a car, you go in there, you touch it, you feel it. So I don't think that anything will take over that, but I think using the digital things example as we discussed, and that can really enhance the experience that the client will get.
I'm really fascinated by this whole engagement and interaction with a customer, especially when he comes in the showroom, and being able to identify who's going to which vehicle. Because I remember doing showroom surveys many years ago, and we used to have people with clickers or little clickers across the door, so we could work out that if we did this advertising, we'd have 500 more people come to the dealership. And that's how basic it was, whereas now you can actually have a look at who's coming and looking at which car, how long they're standing there for, how they're engaging, and you can then even show different ads to those people next to the car based on who they are and what. So you can see, okay, this is a grey-haired old guy, so he'll be interested in these sort of features, and this is a family, and they'll be interested in other features. So you could show different ads.
Don't pick on the grey-haired old guys.
Well, I know what we like.
And we'll show ads of different hats. No, just on that point there, because think about, you have a network of 1,000 dealerships or 800 dealerships, and then you get the statistics out of that, right? And say, last week you had X thousands of people coming through your stores in general, and this is what people in general were interested in. In the northern region, it was more like that, and the southern region more like that. You get a very, very good idea of who are your clients and what are they interested in.
Yeah, because the agency and the marketing department often put together a very clear profile of this is who our target market is. And it'd be great to run that back, because Mark and I often talk about the average age of a person who buys a car is around 50 years old. And you relate that to who the original target market is and where you're placing your advertising and your promotions of that to. There's often discrepancy. So I think this helps clarify a lot better about who you should be targeting.
Absolutely. Actually, there's something, Kim, that you touched on that I thought really that we forget about as well as automotive industry players is the service department signage and how important that is. Because that's the bit that you want to. Often the service department's not in the same place as the sales department. Like, if say it's in a city, the service department's somewhere else. So it's very critical to have that consistency of messaging in your service department, but also to have engagement with your client. So there's the external and internal within the service department that keeps that brand experience and that congruence all the way through.
Yeah, and if you think about it, a lot of people do is they go and have their car serviced, and then they get into the waiting room, and many dealerships have very nice waiting rooms with coffee, and you can put in your computer and you can work from there, right? But that is a brilliant time where you say, I have a potential client sitting there in my room waiting for his car to be serviced, but if I have screens on the wall and interactive communication, they can go and say, hey, what about this? And, equipment for the car he has, or a new car, or all that. So that's where this interaction, and then a record, not on him, Mr. Smith, as a person, but a group, male identified, this and this age group and stuff like that. So you have some statistics. What is it actually that people are interested in? And again, this ad verification, right? How long time are people looking at it? It's very good. I mean, we've done a lot of studies on that. It's very, very clear that people look at it 1 second. I mean, in the advertising industry, 6 seconds is the optimal. You'll see that all over the place, that ads last 6 seconds, simply because that's a human, it takes 6 seconds to pick up the message. So if you just blink, look up and 1 second, no, 3 seconds, yes, there's something, but not really. And 6 seconds, I get the whole message. So that's two things there. One is are you addressing an interest with the client, and is your ad attractive? But all that information on 1,000 dealerships in different areas over the weeks is powerful.
Very powerful stuff.
So Kim, if anyone wants to get in contact with you or find out more about your interactive screens, where's the best place to contact you?
That is Signcraft here in Altona, and we have salespeople ready to talk. And our website, signcraft.com.au, that's where our contact details are. So that would be a place. And, I can obviously provide you with more information on this and if needed.
It's interesting when you do the deep dive, and even though John and I, we sort of think we know a lot about the industry, it's great to have a specialist like yourself come on board, because the things that you say, and I just was sitting here and thinking, of course, there's the challenges of the different materials. Then there's the maintenance of it. Then I was thinking of so when there's storms and there's crashes and all these sorts of things, and then you talked about of course, we know we forget of the council that causes the problem for the new dealer that you're trying to get underway, because they won't let the sign be this big, or there's too much light, so they've made the pillar smaller, versus the other dealer who's only 4 suburbs across that has this massive sign, so he's got an unfair advantage versus this one, and all of those little mechanics, because it's all different. And if you don't have a coordinated single supplier as the car company, you don't get consistency. The logo never looks right.
Precisely.
This one always is a bit different to this one, because there's a different material being used here versus here, or there's a different program used. One's using Mac, one's using Apple, so that it's not quite right. All those little idiosyncrasies come into play, and if you try to establish a brand because you want to tell a consistent story, you've spent all this money telling the digital story and advertising, but if you don't get the signage right, you really miss like I'll use a football analogy, you can do all the work in the midfield and defence, but you get it to the forward line and it just falls apart because the sign's not the right.
That's precisely where the challenge is, because that's not as obvious for everybody that it is, when we're deep into it, and that's a challenge. And the maintenance part, as I said, really important. If you think about the amount of money spent on signage when they roll out a new CI, and you think about the relatively limited cost of keeping them clean and all that over a 10-year period, I can show you calculations that says it is outright non-logic, if I can use that expression, not to maintain your signage, because no matter what, you can use the best material in the whole wide world. If you don't maintain it and you see it 5 years later, it's not going to look the same. And we can bring back what we call the gloss and the color. We can bring that back and keep that for years and years, 10 years, if we just maintain it. Like you can do with the car, but if you don't wash it, everybody knows what the consequences are, but the logic doesn't necessarily reflect into our products.
I think also when dealers forget about the actual, they want to use a local person, but then when it falls down in a year's time, they forget that they try to use someone locally and it costs half the price.
Or the signs warp, or the plastic's warping, or it just doesn't look quite right.
And, to the extent that the corporate identity understands the value of, if your sign looks like crap, if that's a word, you identify your product with that, right? I mean, you can't sell something if your dealership looks like cheap or not maintained and all that. And again, some companies understand that, and in my experience, obviously the European and the Japanese specifically, and now South Korean also, they understand that. They understand the value of keeping identity exactly the same, no matter what country you're in. And obviously, Australia is a big island on its own, but in Europe, for example, you would see that when you drive from Denmark, to take that example, the whole way through Germany, Holland, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy, when you see a dealership there, it looks exactly the same, and that's what they want.
Well, Kim, thanks for coming on the show. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as we have. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you for having me. It's always nice to have a chance to talk a little bit about what we do, and and that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Hopefully you got as much out of the conversation with Kim as we did. There's a lot more to signage than meets the eye, pardon the pun.
Remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And we'll speak to you again next week.